There was a time when the border between Scotland and England was a wild and lawless place, when horsemen looted, burned and pillaged their way into history. These night riders were the border reivers, and best known of all were the Armstrongs, the most dangerous and feared of all riding clans. The Armstrongs could put 3,000 men into the saddle and are reputed to have done more damage by foray than any other clan. It's easy to romanticise these border reivers, to make them out to be proud, independent horsemen who challenged authority, which is the picture we get from the ballads, but it's rather a one-sided glimpse into history. One ballad tells the story of Johnny Armstrong of Glencoe, a particularly dashing and unruly bandit who made a mockery of royal authority. In 1529, King James V invited the Armstrongs to a conference, but when Johnny arrived with his usual band of 36 followers, he found himself surrounded by the king's much larger force. Johnny offered to make a deal, but he and his men were hung as an example. Another ballad hero, Kinmont Willie, is remembered as the victim of treachery who escaped imprisonment in Carlisle Castle. But like all good bandits, Willie died in his bed, though we don't know where or when this happened. It's worth remembering these men were anything but heroic. They led an overwhelming force and destroyed wantonly. They preyed on easy targets, killed if they were resisted, and literally stripped their victims of everything they had, with no thought of welfare other than their own. But you can't go around committing murder, burning houses and stealing cattle for 200 years without making enemies, and two things finished the Reivers. With the border gone, they could no longer play one country against the other, and a policy of pacification brought them into line. Throughout the early 1600s, communities were displaced and hundreds of fortified houses were destroyed. Families were rounded up and dispatched to Ireland, or they were scattered across England. Some men were encouraged to enlist to fight in the various Low Country wars, defending their new country's new frontier. But border roots still run deep, and border names have been carried further than their ancestors could have imagined. When man first set foot in the moon, it was an Armstrong who led the charge, and he carried a piece of his family tartan with him. In many ways, the Cameron history is defined by a loyalty that allowed the Jacobite dream, for a few months at least, to almost become a reality. The exiled Stewart monarchy tried to regain their throne by reaching back to Scotland and enlisting the support of clans such as the Camerons. But the man who would be king, Prince Charles Edward Stewart, landed with hardly any arms or ammunition, little money, and without the promised French support. When the clan chief, Donald Cameron of Lochiel, met the prince, he told him that since these things were promised, the clansmen were relieved of any obligation to join the campaign, and he strongly suggested that Charles should return to France and wait for a better opportunity. But the prince decided to follow his own advice, sent his ships away, and when he raised his standard at Glenfinnan, he looked set to begin his rebellion with around 200 MacDonalds, till Cameron of Lochiel arrived with more than 1,000 clansmen. Lochiel was appointed governor of Edinburgh, having led the siege against the castle. He advised the prince to stop, arguing the Jacobites now controlled Scotland and with French support could mount an effective defence of the country. But again, the prince knew better, and they marched south. Donald Cameron became known as the Gentle Lochiel. He ordered that prisoners taken at the Battle of Prestonpans should be cared for, and on the Jacobite retreat from Derby ensured that Glasgow, like Edinburgh, did not suffer reprisals because of their opposition to the prince. And to this day, city bells are rung when the present Cameron of Lochiel enters Glasgow. And the Cameron clansmen charged with such suicidal courage at the Battle of Culloden that General Wolfe called them the bravest clan among them. Lochiel was carried from Culloden with both ankles shattered. He was hidden in the mountains, joined the prince in his flight through the heather, and escaped with him to France, where Lochiel died less than 2 years later. His brother, Alexander, who was the prince's chaplain, died in a Thames prison hulk, but his other brother, the prince's doctor, Archie, also escaped to France with the prince. Archie Campbell came back to Scotland, was betrayed, and on the 7th of June 1753 was dragged on a sledge to Tyburn, where, after he'd been hung, his heart and entrails were thrown onto an open fire. He was 45 years old and the last man to die for the Jacobite cause. The Campbells were the richest and most powerful of all Scottish clans, with a Highland empire that stretched from the Moray Firth across to the Hebrides, through Argyll and down into Ayrshire and the Lowlands. This is a clan whose reputation was sealed when Captain Robert Campbell of Lyon led the massacre of his Clan MacDonald hosts at Glencoe, an act of betrayal that has stained the Campbell name. But the Glencoe massacre can be seen as the culmination of a centuries-old feud between the Campbells and the MacDonalds. And it's a tit-for-tat battle that cost thousands of lives and came to a head when a Campbell clan chief had the satisfaction of watching his arch-enemy's journey to the scaffold. This is the same man who placed the Scottish crown on Charles II's head, only to later find himself imprisoned in the Tower of London and sent back to Scotland, where he followed his enemy's journey heavenward. His son, the first Duke of Argyll, pretty much followed in his father's footsteps, and his grandson raised the regiment that was used for the massacre at Glencoe. Throughout the 18th century, having Clan Campbell on your side gave you access to a fighting force of more than 5,000 men. This clan has raised more than a dozen regiments, including the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders. And though the Campbells went from strength to strength, as ambitious in peace as they'd been in war, economics and a changing fortune forced them to shed some of their old territory. But the clan roots are as strong as ever, and across the world more than 90 family names are associated with the great Clan Campbell. You might think the best place to find the source of Clan Currie would be in Edinburgh, where there's a suburb which used to be a village with the same name. But the Currie origins are not in the capital. But the surname comes from the Clan MacVurach, a family of hereditary bards who served the Lords of the Isles and the MacDonalds of Clanranald for more than 500 years. Following the Jacobite defeat at Culloden and the occupation of the Highlands, many Gaelic names were anglicised, or they were more usually given English names that faintly resembled the original. So, MacVurach appeared in a variety of forms before eventually arriving at Currie. The clan's origins go back to the 13th century, when Muirach O'Daly was expelled from Ireland, it's thought for murder, and arrived in Scotland in 1213. O'Daly settled in Finlarag on Islay, stronghold home of Donald, Lord of the Isles, the man who gave his name to Clan Donald, and grandson of the great Somerled, who built an island empire that stretched the length of the west coast. In Gaelic, he was known as Rhénanielin, the King of the Isles. As bards to Clan Donald, the MacVurach family held positions of great authority, second only to the clan chiefs. Some were lawyers and physicians, but the bards held the most important role of all, recording clan history and devising epic poetry to remind warriors of the past glories. But the lordship's authority crumbled when they tried to negotiate the breakup of Scotland, forming an alliance with Edward IV of England, and they were eventually suppressed by King James IV. But the MacVurach bardic tradition continued with the MacDonalds of Clanranald in South Uist. The MacVurigs had already served Clan Donald for more than 300 years, but the Clan Ranald Association produced the largest collection of Gaelic poetry, notably the Red and Black Books of Clan Ranald, which contain material which was certainly composed and put into written form well within the period of the lordship. The line was extinguished when Niall MacVurich died in 1726. He had chronicled James Graham, the great Montrose's campaign against Cromwell, in the last body of Gaelic prose in Scotland, written in the ancient Irish style of his ancestors.